Hi, everyone. In this episode, we delve into chilling accounts of creatures so bizarre and elusive that they will challenge your understanding of the natural world. Bundle up as we hear the chilling details, examine the evidence, and attempt to unravel the truth behind these enigmatic creatures. So, if you're in it to win it, please squash that subscribe button and let's get into the stories. I used to be a ranger in Kentucky and handled quite a variety of duties over the course of my time there. At one point, part of my job was to keep the recreational shooting sports range operating. I grew up in a family that liked to shoot and hunt, so my dad had trained me to know what I was doing around guns. I really geek out about firearms, and I have a bit of an obsession with maintaining them and using them responsibly. I'd lived in Kentucky my whole life, and my family's land was nearby to the national forest where I worked. My family owns 20 acres of land, so I liked to go out there when I was practicing. I had purchased a new rifle and needed to sight in my gun after I bought it. I'd gotten a drum magazine and I wanted to test out its reliability. My family had owned that land for decades. Nothing weird had ever happened out there that I knew of. I'd taken people to that spot plenty of times. I had the brand new magazine and hadn't had a chance to use it yet. I grabbed my gun, the drum, and 20 rounds of ammo and went to the field I liked to use. To get to the field, I had to go through a barbed wire fence and a few hundred feet of wooded area. It was an unnaturally cold day. As soon as I crossed over the barbed wire, something felt off. I'd been there 1,000 times, and like I said, I'd never had any weird experiences. But something felt really strange that day. I kept going though because I thought I was being paranoid or the wind and air pressure were just right to give an eerie feeling. So I walked on deeper into the woods. The further I got, the stronger the feeling was. I got halfway there and the feeling was getting pretty intense. I hadn't loaded my ammo into the magazine yet because I wanted to hurry and get to the field so I could get everything set up. I stopped dead in my tracks and loaded the magazine with the 20 rounds I brought. Things were weird, and I felt like I needed to be ready, just in case. Then out of nowhere, I smelled something dead. I'd been standing there for a few minutes with no scent when all of a sudden it smelled like a month-old rotting carcass was beside me. I looked around, and there behind me, I saw a mangled animal. Aside from the smell, it looked nearly fresh. It was so mangled, though, so it was hard to tell what it even was. It was a white-gray color. I thought it was a rabbit or a possum, but I couldn't stop thinking about how the smell didn't go along with the freshness of the carcass. Whatever the stench was, it wasn't coming from that animal, I thought. I finished loading the magazine and stuck it in my gun. I held the bolt open so that if I tripped, the gun wouldn't fire accidentally. I was nearly out of the thick woods and could see the field I was heading to. It was straight ahead. The whole time up until now, I'd been walking alongside the creek. The creek turns to the left as you approach the field. As I got to the turn in the creek, I heard a loud splash in the water. I turned around, and what I saw, I'll never forget. This thing was easily 8 feet tall and was standing on 2 legs. And other than the water splash, it was dead silent. The creature had very long arms and long legs. It was light brown, like a grayish brown. It didn't look like fur, though, more like skin, but the skin was really bedraggled and hanging off of it. It looked severely malnourished. It was incredibly skinny, and the skin was tight across its body. Imagine taking a fully grown man that only weighs 120 pounds and stretching him out to be 8 feet tall. It had an odd walk, too, but that could have been caused by the mud near the creek bed. It never faced me, so I didn't get a chance to see its front. It just kept walking and never turned around. I think the freakiest thing about it was its size. It scared the absolute crap out of me. I tried to close the bolt on my gun to chamber around, just in case it turned around to fight. I had no intention of shooting unless it gave a sign it was going to attack. But when I tried to chamber around, the magazine wouldn't let go of the round. The force of the bolt closing would break your finger if you were to close it on your finger. I had been loading and unloading the magazine the day before to help loosen the spring to make it easier to load in the future. I could take the rounds out with my hand, but when I came across this terrifying creature, somehow The gun decides it wants to hold on to the freaking bullet. By now, the thing was out of my sight, and I was just standing there feeling defenseless. I have no idea what that thing was, but all I can do is thank God it walked away from me. The weird thing was, I had no doubt in my mind that it was something not of this world, and it's not like me to think like that. It felt like something almost supernatural. I never saw that thing again, but I always felt really paranoid in that area after that. Lesson learned, always be prepared. I was walking home from work at about 11 p.m. one night. I lived at the end of a road just outside of town that had no streetlights, and it was fairly dark out that night. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness at that point, and luckily I could see well enough to walk without tripping over anything. I live in Oak Grove, South Carolina, which is just to the west of Columbia. The area beyond where I live is mostly undeveloped woods with patches of farmland. At least it used to be that way until they started building houses on every available lot several years ago. I guess people need places to live while working in the city, but I hated it. The good thing is, though, there's not much crime here, just the occasional occurrence of a car break-in or vandalism. Anyway, this particular night seemed a bit odd. I can't really tell you why, but something about it just seemed off. Like I wasn't as comfortable walking home as I normally would be. So, just to calm my mind, I stopped walking and listened, so see if anything seemed strange. I remember thinking that it must have just been my imagination playing with me. I walked on for a few more minutes, and that's when I noticed something dog-sized and shaped like a dog sitting on top of the rusting remains of a cover for an old well. The shape seemed to be looking my way, even watching me intently, but it stayed where it was. I'm pretty sure I even heard it letting out a low growl every now and then. Obviously, the dog's growls made me nervous, so I picked up my pace, trying to stay just ahead of whatever it was. But this turned out to be difficult. What happened was that even though I had passed by the area where it had been sitting, the animal stood up and began to follow me at an incredibly fast rate, much faster than it should have been able to move. For the next few minutes, it continued following me while occasionally snarling and snapping at me. I tried to hurry my pace and outrun it. I knew that I was no match for the dog if it decided to attack, so then I ran as fast as my legs could go. Finally, I reached the safety of my back porch, got in the house, and slammed and locked the sliding glass door behind me. The dog creature was nowhere to be seen now, but I could still hear its sounds in the distance, growling. Was it going to break into my house and eat me? I was still breathing hard when the phone in my pocket started vibrating loudly. It scared me a little bit, and I felt my heart skip a few beats. I fumbled for the phone and answered it in a shaky voice. Hello? Hey, check this out. I'm at the end of your road now. It was my friend Sean who was on his way to my house to hang out. He continued talking, unaware that I was still trying to catch my breath. And there is this creature crouching. I could hear him chuckle as he said it. There's this dog sitting on the side of the road, like watching me. It's huge. Like seriously, something looks to be wrong with it. It's like half dog and half human. I'm gonna try and get a picture of it. Just a sec while I open the camera and get closer. The thought of Sean getting closer to that thing was terrifying. But before I could say anything, he continued talking, and it sounded like he had the camera on and was talking to the creature. And that's when I heard Sean yell. Next, I heard what sounded like breaking glass and a thud, followed by Sean screaming. I panicked, thinking that he had been attacked by the creature. Our phones were still connected, but now there was no sound coming through to me at all. I decided I had no choice but to head outside and try to find Sean to see what happened to him. That's when I saw the creature sitting right next to Sean's car, making a strange clicking sound with its throat. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, hunched over like an ape but covered in thick black fur. It was terrifying to look at. I could see that Sean was still in the driver's seat, but his phone was laying outside the car on the street. The creature must have smashed through his window and thrown it off to the side. I decided that if I could get to the car, then maybe I would have a chance of getting Sean to focus and drive away from there. Everything happened so fast and I had no time to react. Suddenly, the thing stood up straight and gave a disturbing, deep growl. Its head was facing towards my direction, so I started running as fast as I could to get inside the car. I felt like it was right behind me when I reached the door and jumped inside. "Go!" I yelled to Sean, who luckily slammed his foot on the accelerator and peeled out of there. Later, I asked him why in the world he thought it would be a good idea to stop and take a picture of something so terrifying. He told me that never in a million years did he suspect that he had come across an actual cryptid. He thought it was just some old mangy dog or a trick of the light making it look like it was half human. These days, we don't really talk about it ever. It just seems like we've both forgotten about it. Or maybe it's just that we're too scared to bring it up and say it out loud. That has to be what it is. We're just too scared. Because I can tell you for certain that I haven't forgotten about it one bit. Every town has its stories. And our town, nestled in the craggy arms of the Rocky Mountains, has a story that sends shivers down my spine even today. It's about my encounter with a creature. I am Bill, an old hand in these parts, and the tale I am about to share is a bone-chilling one. Our town, with its beautiful landscapes and thriving forests, is a paradise for those who love the wild. It's a peaceful place, a hidden jewel where one can truly appreciate the majesty of nature. But it is also home to an old cabin where one of the first settlers of our area used to live. This cabin, abandoned for years, is an important piece of our history, and as the town historian, it was my duty to preserve it. My motivation was not only my job, but a genuine fascination and love for the mysteries of the past. It was July 2nd, a balmy summer evening in 2019. I planned to document some aspects of the cabin's interior. The old, weathered wood and history-filled rooms always filled me with a sense of purpose. The cabin was an easy hike outside of town along a path into the forest. But as I reached it that day, I instantly knew something was off. A smell hit me, a strange mix of scents. A smell that was new to me, but I brushed it off, attributing it to the cabin's age, and continued inside. I was engrossed in my work, and hours rolled by. But eventually, I heard it. A low growl, almost like a murmur on the wind. It was distant, but noticeable. It was eerie, but at the time I only paused a second before I dismissed it as an animal in the forest. A few more moments passed when suddenly I felt a chill run down my spine. The sense of being watched. My skin prickled and I turned to see an 8-foot-tall creature standing upright in the doorway of the cabin. Its body was a bizarre mix. It had the legs of a dog, but with wide shoulders and a big chest. A hump on its back gave it a monstrous silhouette. The face was demonic, more hyena than human, with a long snout and a double row of teeth visible even in the dim light. I froze. I could see its dark brown, almost black hair slicked against its body. And those eyes, they seemed to glow in the darkness with a cruel gleam lurking in them. The dilemma I faced was grave. Do I run or do I stand my ground? It was then that my survival instincts kicked in. I moved slowly, inching my way towards the back door. My heart pounded in my chest like a jackhammer, each beat echoing in my ears. Sweat trickled down my brow and I blinked to clear the salty sting from my eyes. I was acutely aware of every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet as I moved slowly backwards, each creak seeming to shout my presence to the creature. It was watching me with an unnerving stillness. Its low growling hung heavy in the air. Suddenly, there was a sharp crack, a twig snapping outside the cabin behind the creature. The creature's ears perked up, and it turned its attention away from me for just a moment. Seizing the opportunity, I lunged towards the door, grasping the rusted knob in my hand. The creature spun back around, its eyes flashing ominously. Panic surged through me as I pulled at the door, my heart sinking when it didn't budge. It was stuck. Desperate, I threw my shoulder against the wooden barrier, the impact jarring my bones. Once, twice, and on the third time, the door flew open with a loud groan. I tumbled outside and landed on the ground. I scrambled to my feet, not daring to look back as I sprinted towards the tree line. The creature let out a bone-chilling howl, sound echoing through the night air, resonating in my very soul. Behind me, the cabin loomed ominously, and I just kept running. As I disappeared into the woods, a breathless prayer of thanks escaped my lips. I was alive. As I weaved through the trees, I could still hear the creature's howls in the distance. I didn't stop running until I was well away from the cabin. I trudged towards the town, but I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of dread. Was the creature following me? I dared not look back, fearing that I would see its ominous figure emerging from the shadows. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stepped onto the paved road leading into town. The streetlights overhead cast pools of light onto the ground, guiding my way. I approached the police station. As I pushed open the door, the cool, air-conditioned interior washed over me. The officer at the desk looked up in surprise, her eyes widening at the sight of me, disheveled, exhausted, and terrified. "I need help," I managed to croak out, my voice hoarse from exertion and fear. Her expression turned serious as she nodded, reaching for the phone. Over the following hours, I narrated my horrific encounter to the police, who listened with grave faces and took copious amounts of notes. As I watched the forest from the safety of the police station, I wondered about the creature. Was it still there, lurking in the shadows? I shuddered at the thought. The ordeal was far from over, and it was clear that our quiet town would never be the same again. But for the moment, I was safe. The creature had been left behind, confined to the darkness of the forest, and I held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could keep it there. I've been a long-time listener and have finally decided to come forward with my own haunted tale. The story takes place in the small town of Ripley, Tennessee, in the summer of 1995. Back then, Ripley was home to a little pet store nestled in a strip mall right off of the highway. I was 16 years old and had just acquired my first job there at the shop. I was excited about working there. I'd loved animals my whole life and was especially fond of unique birds like Amazon parrots, cockatoos, and Indian ringnecks. You know, the talking varieties. Needless to say, on my first day at the store, I was completely enamored when my boss introduced me to a Moluccan cockatoo named Charlie, who even carry on short, simple conversations if properly socialized. Charlie was one of those special birds that had developed a knack for conversation. I loved closing up the store in the evenings because it gave me time with Charlie to listen to him gab. He would often go on about the day. He'd squawk and talk about customers he had seen. For example, he once met a little girl in a hat that fed him half of her cookie. That night, hours after seeing her, he was still talking about Hat Kid and the treat. When she came back to the store weeks later with her grandma, he recognized her and called out, "Hi, Hat Girl," and she wasn't even wearing the hat. It was amazing. On my third month there, something tragic happened. One of my coworkers, Derek, was killed in a head-on collision leaving a party. I won't lie and say Derek and I were close. In fact, Derek was probably my least favorite coworker simply because I didn't really understand why he, who clearly hated animals, had chosen to work in a pet store. Derek was a troubled guy. He was rough with animals when he'd kennel them. He was constantly yelling at the animals to shut up, and he could be especially mean to Charlie. When Derek died, the whole store went through the motions of losing one of our own. Of all of us who worked at the shop, though, I was probably the least torn up about it. Don't get me wrong, I felt sad for Derek's life being lost and for his family, but he and I just weren't as close as he was with some of the others. On the day of Derek's funeral, I volunteered to work by myself so the others could have the day off. Even if we didn't open the store, someone would have to come in and feed and clean up after the animals. So on that day, I was all alone at the shop, and all throughout the day, spooky things kept occurring. Locked doors would open out of nowhere. The radio, which I usually kept tuned to the local country station, would suddenly switch over to heavy metal. And the animals all seemed to be more restless than usual. We had 2 Persian kittens in the shop who spent the day huddled in the back of their kennel, hissing toward the front. The Cocker Spaniel puppy, who was normally playful, was trembling and wanting to be held. The reptiles were all hiding under their logs and rocks. Even Charlie seemed off. "It's a bad day," he kept saying. I thought maybe they were all just picking up on the energy of the shop. After all, it was a bad day. It was a sad day. Animals are naturally intuitive and empathetic toward people, right? They probably sensed it. That still didn't explain the doors or the radio or the sound of heavy footsteps across the tile when I knew I was alone, though. I was glad to see closing time coming. I started putting the animals to bed and cleaning up around the shop early. I wanted to get out of the store and home as soon as possible. As always, I left Charlie out of his cage until last. At 7 o'clock, I locked the front doors and carried the tray of food dishes to the back room to wash them before going home for the night. I left Charlie on his perch, as I always did, and the radio was playing my country station. As I started to wash, the radio cut off. It didn't change stations this time. It just cut off. I was in a hurry to get home, though, so I didn't bother going to check out why. The radio had been acting up all day. I wasn't going to fret over it now, but only a minute later, Charlie started screaming. "No Derek," he yelled. "No Derek, no Derek, no Derek, no Derek, no Derek," over and over and over again like a broken record. I ran from the back to the front of the store to see what was going on. And I really mean left. I never went back again. However, I do second-guess myself and wonder if it was all just a figment of my imagination or what. What do you think?